In our 11th episode, Brandon and I explore the 8th manager intelligence skill, intentional. You will learn what this skill is, why the best managers have honed and developed it, and some practical tools you can utilize to develop this skill to lead strong. Let's dive right in.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Leading Strong, the place to be to level up your leadership effectiveness on one of your most important roles, engaging your employees. Managers are responsible for at least 70% of their employees' engagement. The best managers, like you, lead strong by constantly honing and developing the skills needed to keep their teams engaged. Your hosts, Darren Veresamy and Brandon Miller, are the co-founders of 34 Strong, a company that creates great places to work. Their team has worked in Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, and small businesses to lead strong. Now over to Darren.
Welcome to Season 1 of Leading Strong, where we will dive deep to grow your manager intelligence. I'm your host, Darren Veresamy, here to serve you in your continued discovery and growth to lead strong. This episode of Leading Strong is brought to you by 34 Strong, where organizations just like yours become great places to work. To find out more, check out 34strong.com. Hey, good morning, Brandon.
Good morning, Darren.
Good to see you, my friend. You were joining us today from Lake Tahoe, correct?
That is correct. Sunny and beautiful up here.
Sunny and beautiful, yeah. As we're recording this, we are deep amidst some of the fires here within California. So good call, and escaping some of the smoke has been filling up our valley. That was a really intentional choice that you made earlier this week. And interestingly enough, that is our manager intelligence skill that we're going to be exploring today. And when we think of this skill, it's this effort that we put in to align our team toward transformational outcomes. It's easy for us to say that and to kind of think about that. And this is one of those really powerful skills that we see that some people have, and they're just able to be really intentional, really thoughtful in what they do, and how that shows up and how that ripples to create the impact on teams becomes quite profound. Now, these oftentimes are the little things that people are doing to kind of create those spaces. We're going to start off like we always do and just kind of explore, what does it look like when we're working for a leader, for a manager that is very intentional? What does it look like to the team, Brandon, when they are working with a manager that has kind of developed this skill and is pretty strong here?
When we talk about being intentional, we're literally saying you're being on purpose. You're doing things with an intent to lead to the outcome or the direction that you want to go. So let's use communication as an example. When I'm intentional with my words, my actions, body language, tone of voice, I know that every part of my communication is sending a message to a receiver. And if I am intentional about the message that I want them to receive, then I've thought in advance and I know how I want to comport myself to send the message effectively. What we learn, and many of us, I will put myself down on this one along with all of the rest of us, we have been unintentional. We've inadvertently sent messages we didn't mean to. Our facial expression, our tone of voice, or the words we used didn't convey, and we've had to go back and undo some things that we did. And so intentional is purposeful. It's thinking in advance, and it's being aware of my impact upon those I lead. And therefore, I want to be intentional with my behavior, with my tone, with my words, and ultimately with where we land, our goals, and what we accomplish together in our workplace.
You know, it's fascinating. And this is one of these skills. All of these skills have elements as to where they're going to show up in our work life as we're managing. We can practice these skills in our personal life and going through. I got this really interesting awareness piece, the unintentional element that Brandon, that you talked about. One of my really, really close friends, we actually met at her wedding, my good friend Misty. My wife used to work with her, and we met at her wedding. And Misty and I went to college together. And I'll never forget, there was this one night we were studying, Brandon, me, her, and there was a group of us that were studying. It was finals, and it was a statistics final, not something that I hit a grand slam in college. And I vividly remember that evening, I looked up, we had been studying for hours. It wasn't sticking for me. It wasn't sticking for everybody. And I looked up and I said, well, you know what, guys? I was like, Misty, if we don't know it now, we're never going to know it. So I just got up and I said, I'm going to go home, I'm going to sleep, and I'm going to make the most of it. I didn't realize it, but that caused a rift with her and with I for a period of time. And the reason why, she came back and she said, Darren, you gave up on us, and you were always the person that never gave up on me. So it felt like a betrayal to her. And for me, I was just tired and just said, well, forget it. And these elements, sometimes we also have to think about the way that we're communicating and what that could message completely in it. I'm happy to say that didn't impact our friendship for the long term, but it put a little bump in the road and I didn't understand what was off. And then I bumped into her one day and I said, Misty, tell me what's going on. You've been a little distant in our friendship. And then she explained it. I didn't even realize it, but I totally connected the dots as to who you've been and who I had been in her life. And sometimes those little pieces like that can take place. Take us through, Brandon, when we're looking at this as well on the highs and lows. Brandon's going to take us through what the highs of this skill are and what the lows are. And he mentioned, one of the things you mentioned was planning the purposeful elements. There's certain keywords with each of these skills as we're exploring them that really describe them. And when we're intentional, we're going to arrange the time to make things happen, to have those conversations. We're going to be deliberate about what we choose to say and not to say, or how we choose to interact or not interact, present, whatnot. Planned is critical. The word thoughtful comes to mind, as well as purposeful and efficient. Now let's explore the highs and lows of this skill. And as you're listening in, I'm going to invite you to do this. Take your own inventory of where you might lie on this scale. If you rate 1 as you're really low on this scale, so when you're listening to the low, if you say, yeah, that's more like me, you can be on the lower end. And if you're at a 5, that's going to be on the high end of this. That's definitely you all the time. Or maybe you lie in the middle of that, 2 to 3. But this is a way for you to just grow your own self-awareness around this skill and any of these skills that we're going through. Can you take us through the highs and lows?
Absolutely. So we'll start low. If you are a 1 or a 2, either this is not something you've given much thought to, though for many of us who are in leadership management roles, we by nature have been intentional with what we do. We've planned in advance things that we say, how we say them. But yet, if this isn't something that comes natural or easy to you, then what will happen is that our team will start to question or wonder how their job has an impact on the overall mission or purpose of the organization. And what you'll notice is disengaged employees. And disengaged employees are typically those that are simply trading their time for money. They're there in mind and body, but you don't have their spirit. You don't have the zest for the work that they're doing. And so with a lack of intention, we will see people just going through the motions. That's the indicator that there is room to work on this particular skill. A very high level, so a 5 out of 5 or a 4 out of 5, is where individuals are valued and recognized for their contributions. They know their place within the overall mission and vision and the values of the organization. They can recite it, and they're often quite engaged. In fact, these are the ones that are very committed to your outcome. They will go above and beyond. They will do more, say more, and be a part of more, even without being requested to. So this does require the intentional planning and design thinking and awareness around my impact of my presence, my words, my thoughts, my engagement with my team, and how it will affect the way that we show up and how we do our work together.
And Brandon, you and I know as leaders, we have wrestled with wanting to get a lot of things done, right? So really focusing on the execution parameters. And if you are an execution-centric leader, that's okay. One of the things to remember, though, is sometimes it's easy to get caught up on the tasks that are at hand. But instead of just focusing on getting the tasks done, we got to make sure we're also getting the people done. And our people are never done and completed. They're not a box to check. But that being said, if you are a leader that really enjoys crossing something off your list, sometimes it's easy for us to get stuck in that place of, I don't have time to be intentional about having that conversation with my people or making that time because I have all these things on my to-do list. And if you are driven that way, maybe you want to add them to your calendar and make sure that we're staying in space with having that one-to-one time, if that's part of it. Maybe you're adding people to your to-do list. asking a question of yourself each week. Who can I connect with this week? Check in with on some level. And as always, we're going to give you some techniques on how to do that, what it looks like when you're strong in that skill and weak in that skill. We're going to get a little bit deeper in that process. We always love to give you a book recommendation here in season 1 that ties in with each of these manager intelligence skills. This week, we're going to be talking just briefly about the book called The Art of Possibility. Brandon, can you tell us about this? This is by Rosamond Stone Zander and Benjamin Zander. Love Ben Zander's work. His TEDx talk. If you get a chance to check that out, it's well worth this. But tell a little bit about The Art of Possibility.
Ben Zander tells great stories, and I want to reiterate, if you search YouTube for Benjamin Zander, the former conductor of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra, and talks about music and the way that it interacts with us and how we think, and he gets into such a powerful anecdote around the impact of intentionality in leadership. And he talks about his own realization that his style of leadership was leading to ineffective outcomes, essentially disengaged people. And he began to question himself around the way that he thought about leadership, the way that he thought about effective leadership. And he had an epiphany. He realized that as the leader, he was responsible to bring the best out of those who were assigned to him, those who were assigned to follow him or a part of his team, if you will. And what he began to come to terms with is that he needed a way to know that he was being effective. He needed a way to know that if his intentional effort to engage his people was working, what would he see? What would he hear? And what he got it down to, and it's such a powerful concept, is that he knew that if he looked in their eyes and he could see their eyes shine, that brilliance, that life, that zest within them, that he knew he was doing his job. And so literally what Ben talked about, both in his TED Talk and in their book, is the search for these shining eyes. And in that, everything that he did began to be purpose-driven toward, if I'm making their eyes shine, I'm doing my job. But if their eyes are not shining, then I get to ask myself the question, who am I being? Not what am I doing, not what am I saying, but who am I being that their eyes are not shining? It reframed his entire approach to leadership with dramatic and impressive outcomes.
You know, and for those of you that are in long-term relationships, for those of you that have a spouse, long-term partner, children, this approach of asking that question completely applies there. It interjects that pause, that intentional pause, that pattern interruption to think about, who am I being that is not putting the shine in their eyes? Brandon even talks a little bit about this in his book that he wrote with his wife, Annalyn Miller, called Play to Their Strengths, about strengths-based parenting and going through that. I'm going to put a shameless plug in there because it's an awesome book. It's completely changed the way that I've parented, that my wife has parented, and we've been intentional with our children and going through. Many of these skills, as we said, they're going to help you lead strong in your work, in your organization, and you're going to have some nuggets as to how you can grow as a person in other areas as well. So you got 2 great books there, The Art of Possibility, and check out Play to Their Strengths as well. I think that's incredible. And they both play in the lens of being intentional. We're going to step forward and look at intentional effort that will align your team toward those transformational outcomes. Remember, we're always focusing on what are the outcomes of the team and where you are working to lead them and going through them. And we're going to unpack a little bit deeper of when somebody is strong with the intentional skill, what does it look like? So what are the actions that are taken? What do those habits actually look like? And what does weak intentional skill look like? What do those habits look like? Right now, the fact that you're tuning in and listening gives you a chance to figure out, where do you lie in regards to your habits? You're pausing right now and you have a chance to be intentional and taking that evaluation. Because remember, I said this in one of our past episodes, and you'll hear me say it again. First, we create our habits, then our habits create us. And that's going to be in life, in our eating, in our health, and it's going to be how we're leading strong. And it's the little micro habits that we have that we can hone and create these little shifts on that actually become the reality. So Brandon, it's going to be your choice. Start us on the strong or on the weak side. Where do you want to go?
Well, I'll say this on the weak side. I have learned this phrase recently. It's RBF. So, disclaimer, the B is a word not often used publicly, but the resting B face is something that I learned from one of my daughters in her own realization that she had such a face. And when it was brought to her attention, she realized that the message her face was communicating was not at all what was going through her mind, not at all what she meant for people to think about her or think she was thinking. And what came from this was a conversation we had regarding intentionality with the way that you appear. Most of our communication is happening whether we are saying a word or not. And so when we're weak, this is where we are careless with words. We're unclear with expectations. We have aimless body language, tone of voice. We're inconsistent with praise and recognition, and we're thoughtless. Our responses to questions and challenges, we just let whatever comes through unfiltered out of us. And this is weak. This is where we are not strong in this intentional effort that will align our team toward our transformational outcomes, our true impact that we're capable of.
It's so interesting because I've heard that story with your daughter where she had the resting B face, and everybody can fill in what the B actually is there. That whole piece is fascinating because literally this morning, Brandon, I had a coaching session before we got back on board doing some podcast recording here today. And I had a coaching session, and the gentleman talked about how people had come in and they had said, "Why are you so angry? What are you so upset at?" And he had said nothing. He literally said nothing. I'm not angry at all. I'm actually really excited to have our conversation. But that was his thinking face. He's a high thinker. He needs some time to think. And that intensity of focus in his thoughts was being read completely in a way that he didn't intend. So unintentionally, we can end up hitting some of the marks that we don't want to hit. So when we're strong with the intentional skill, what are some of those habits that we have? What are some of the habits that the best leaders have that are leading strong from this skill of intentional? What does that look like?
Well, when we think about the deliberate approach with how we speak, and we think about being purposeful with our language, specifically body language and tone of voice, which are often not fully appreciated and understood for their power and what they convey. But when we do this, I love this part, Darren, when we're considerate with recognition. We've thought about the best way to make sure each person feels like they're a part of our team, which I would tell you in the midst of COVID-19 and the response that all of our organizations are having, one of the primary points of emphasis that we've heard some of this, but we'd love to hear more, is around giving consistent recognition, essentially praising the common, commending the common, giving people commendation for things that otherwise we might not commend because we know that they're moving through uncertainty. So that's intentional. And that skill of intentional, going back to Xander's eyes that shine, is a way that we build this level of engagement. So expectations are explicit. We're thoughtful with responses to questions and challenges. Even if the thoughtfulness requires, I will get back to you, or I remain silent. Because when one feels a rise in their temperature, essentially meaning I'm being frustrated, sometimes it's best to be intentional about saying nothing, giving space, giving time, let silence work so that we can end up where we ultimately want to land.
It's critical in thinking through that. And as Brandon mentioned, with the changes, with uncertainty, what is fascinating is we've actually seen some teams that have actually strengthened their engagement because those managers have been far more intentional than they've ever been before, because they are commending the common, because they're connecting the dots, those pieces. Remember, intentional is not just something that we do one time. It's something that becomes that habit, and that's how it starts to work. That's how it builds that traction. And that traction, what does it lead to? It leads to an alignment of your team toward those transformational outcomes. Kind of like brushing your teeth, right, Brandon? You can't brush your teeth once in January and then go to the dentist in July and then wonder why you have issues with your teeth. Well, I haven't brushed my teeth, but I did a great job brushing them that one day in January, right? We've got intentional about going through that. I love that piece about commend the common. So I ask everybody this as we're getting close to some wrapping up around some of these takeaways here for today. And as we think about this, how are you being deliberate with your words? And how are you being explicit with your expectations? Are you clear on how you best set expectations with each person? Because each person, that's going to be a little bit unique. If you missed the episode on the manager intelligence skill of individualize, I encourage you to go back and check that out. That was episode number 4. That'll give you some insights in how to uncover and individualize your communication with each person that you lead. And there's a strong connection between individualizing and being explicit with your expectations in a way that connects uniquely to each person on your team. So those are just some of the pieces that we want you to think of. And how are you commending the common? What are the things that people are doing that seem like that's just common, but right now, maybe in times of uncertainty and times of challenge, it's actually far more difficult to make those a reality. So the final piece that we want to share before we close out on our quote, there's just some habits that can help you with being intentional with your effort. There's 3 areas that we just want to briefly share with you, and those are cue, action, and reward. Brandon, can you share a little bit about each of those points and how they tie in together in the habit formation?
Absolutely. So when we're thinking about forming a new habit, we have to recognize that we're going to be essentially challenged up to and including sideswiped, assaulted, and tackled to the ground by old habits that want to stay the way they are. The brain feels very comfortable doing what it's done. It likes to reproduce habits that essentially we taught it to do and reinforce. So when you're shifting, it does require that there's an interrupter, there's a cue, something that tells me. Could be a reminder on my phone, could be a sticky note near my desk, could be something that I have from another person that's helping me with my cue. So the cue then leads to some specific action. So a very practical step, and then there's reward. And I'll give you an example. So I was in the course of wanting to shift a certain habit regarding just my own study and my own learning. And so I created a space of accountability with a good friend. And what we agreed to was that each day I would send to this person a quick text to say, yes, I'm on track and I'm doing what it is I committed to. And then the friend has been really good about if he doesn't hear from me by a certain time of the day, he's checking with me. How's it going? And then by the end of the day, when I've reached my goal, the reward is the satisfaction of seeing all those text messages over the course of many days, reinforcing the new pattern. And so the cue, that's the interrupter, that's the step to, or the call to action. Then there's the actual work I do with a built-in reward system. So all 3 work together over enough time. So here's a good average to think about. A new habit requires, on average, and I like to use the word sometimes at least 66 days uninterrupted to really form. So in a business habit, for example, if I was going to start giving regular recognition, I may need the cue of a reminder in my calendar, then the action to go and recognize one member of my team for something they've done. It could be commending the common. It could be calling out the extraordinary, and then the reward, that engagement, the shine in their eyes, the sense of satisfaction that I am being intentional with my leadership to get to the outcomes we're aiming for.
Fantastic. So critical. So those are some of the ways that you can build the habits as you're thinking about growing your skill of intentional. You go through, what are your cues, your actions, and your rewards that can help you to build this skill of intentional? We want to encourage you, if you haven't done so yet, be sure to take a look on LinkedIn, Facebook. We do have a Leading Strong podcast, closed groups where you can discuss, you can share, perhaps even gain ideas from others, leaders just like yourself. So be sure to check those out. We'll have links to those in the show notes as well. We love to close by sharing a quote with you. And we're big fans of Simon Sinek's work, have been for a long time, as I'm sure many of you are. Got this great quote, maybe you've heard it before. But people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And what you do simply proves what you believe. This is such a powerful quote on being intentional. Take us away, Brandon, with some final thoughts on this as we're wrapping up today.
I love Simon's start with why way of thinking. It's such a simple yet elegant concept that has challenged so many of us in leadership to define why we do what we do. Purpose-led, intentional effort to make sure that when we are taking our team, our organization, our movement, our children to a place, they know why, they know what's behind it. And it's so much easier, if you will, or just so much more enjoyable when we're following a leader with clear intention, because we know where there is and we know when we've reached that outcome.
So critical for us to think about this. So may you show up intentional this week. What are you going to do based on today's episode to give yourself a chance to build the habit of being intentional? How are you going to be intentional with yourself? What are the things that you can do to start? Again, check out those closed groups on LinkedIn, on Facebook, Leading Strong podcast there, and you'll be able to find out more ways that you can connect with us and share insights with other leaders just like you that are working to level up, to lead strong. We want to thank you for tuning in. Brandon, as always, thank you so much for your insights this week. We will catch you next week as we step forward and talk about the skill of interdependent. Until next time, thank you so much. If you want to continue your growth in Leading Strong by hanging out with others committed to leading strong, join one of our LinkedIn or Facebook groups by looking for the Leading Strong Show. The truth is, organizational results like productivity, profitability, and low employee turnover rise and fall based on employee engagement. The world is starving for strong leaders, as they not only impact an organization's performance, they create massive influence on an employee's overall health and well-being. If you want to learn more about becoming a great place to work, or 34 Strong's signature Leading Strong programs, simply go to 34strong.com, where you will also be able to access resources you can start using immediately and stay connected with us. I want to thank you for sharing this episode with everyone you know who will benefit. Be sure to subscribe through your favorite podcasting channels, and please leave us a review. A big shout out to Wendell Fishman for writing and arranging the tune Aunt Lion for Leading Strong. Remember, everyone deserves a great place to work, and any workplace can be great. You can create culture by intention and design, and change happens with every life you touch. I am Darren Verasamy, here to help you lead strong. Until next time, my friends, I'm out.